This is Kenya's the number one opera in the world, according to Thorin. You're watching Thorin channel, that are also known as the number one existence fan in the world.
With G2 Esports failing to make the playoffs at ESL One New York, despite actually beating FaZe Clan, one of the top ranked teams in the world, in a best of three offline, this is time, I think, to take stock of where G2, the project, is as a team. Obviously, it was a team put in mind with a kind of an architect's view of like, we want these particular players, this type of an in-game leader. It was mainly Shox' vision, obviously, but then he came up with it from talking to Existence, thinking about when he went into Smiths, wanted to play with Kenny S in a team where they were both star players. This is a whole vision. It wasn't just throwing 5 players together, seeing how they do. If it doesn't go well, wipe the slate clean, start all over again, go get different players. No, so let's take stock of where they are as a team, because we've had enough time now. We've had, 5 months or so. They've played 5 different LAN tournaments, and they've only managed to make the playoffs at one of those LAN tournaments. It was their second tournament. It was ESL 1 Cologne, and they finished 5th to 6th there, losing to Big, who obviously went on to play in the finals. They also, their other best of 3 series lost there to Astralis, team that made top 4. So that event sounded fine. But let's run through the different LANs. Let's get some of my thoughts on them, and then let's look at them as a squad. So they started out at ECS Season 5 LAN Finals. That was the first tournament they played. This is after Existence and Shox had just started playing together again. Smiths had just been brought back into the lineup. Shox was coming off wrist surgery, so I think it was unreasonable to expect him to be at some superstar level of form. Existence had only something like a week, I think, maybe worth of practice and not a proper boot camp. So, he didn't have his whole tactical system in place, didn't have a whole approach to the maps. They even claimed, I believe, unless I'm misremembering, that they just used a lot of the holdover tactics and approach from the NBK lineup. Admittedly, only a few of them played with him, and that they didn't necessarily, I think they said something like that, and they hadn't tried to change too much stuff up. And they even at the time listed Existence as a stand-in, actually, if you remember. And they did very poorly at that tournament. They finished 5th to 6th, but you have to remember, this was a tournament that was only 8 teams. ECS isn't a massive LAN. Kenny S was able to look very good still. He was one of the best things coming out of the old G2 lineup. He went ham versus FaZe, like a classic Kenny S type performance. The team, though, first of all, had a severely lacking map pool. They had essentially like 2 maps they could play. Their firepower was non-existent because it was just Kenny S, basically. Shox hadn't come online at all as anything approaching a star player, a fragger, and so understandably, pretty whack result all in all, but the first ever result and with limited resources and time invested. Then came ESL 1 Cologne, their best run to date. They finished 5th to 6th there, but that was a massive tournament with a very robust format, with the best of 3s and the double elimination component and the seeding. Very, very solid run. They beat Na'Vi in a best of 1. Okay, yeah, Na'Vi does drop the odd game. Still pretty legit, though. They beat Mouse Sports, who just had gotten snacks, in a best of 3. Mouse Sports is one of the top-ranked teams in the world. In terms of best of 3s, they still don't lose many of those to top-level opponents. Yes, they lost some best of 1s at the major, so pretty legit result right there. Then they played Astralis. They lost 0-2, but they played very, very close on the top of my head. Wasn't that Dust 2? Yes, I think it was Dust 2. They had a really close, I think it was like overtime. Kenny S went ham, so pretty legit. That was a map at the time Astralis was undefeated on. They've obviously since lost, but they're still a very good team on it. They then finally played Big in the top 6, in the quarterfinals, or the round of 6, whatever you want to call it. Big obviously was an eventual finalist. They had a really close game on Cash. Pretty epic match all in all. But then they went to Dust 2, which is their pick. Got absolutely... No, maybe that was Dust 2. Maybe that was Biggs. I don't know. But anyway, they got absolutely banged out on Dust 2. That was quite an embarrassing game, actually. And their tournament ended. Now, at that point in time, 2 tournaments in. First one had all these excuses, but they were the excuses that had to be taken into account. Second one, this looked pretty good, Okay, if we can shore some of these elements up. That's the problem. Not much changed since then. That proved to be the high point. And they've shown glimpses of that at times, but they haven't been able to replicate it, and we've seen some worse performances. So then we go to DreamHack Open Valencia. Now, DreamHack Open Valencia, unlike ECS and ESL 1 Cologne, not a big tournament, not a Tier 1 tournament, literally not a single, like you would say, S-class, A-class team in attendance. These are all what you would do, the old terminology you've called Tier 2 opponents. So a team like G2, if they've done that strong result at Cologne, very minimum should be in the playoffs. Maybe even winning the championship you would hope for. This result was fucking terrible. They finished 5th to 6th at this tournament as well, but it was only an 8-team tournament. They lost to Luminosity. Now, Luminosity obviously has some solid players, but they're nothing approaching a world-class team. They lost to in 3 of the 4 maps they played against them. Obviously, 2 of those being in a best of 3. So really not acceptable in terms of if you want to be a top team. They beat Virtus.pro 2-0, but this is a Virtus.pro that already was pretty much done. They had no stacks at this point in time. He'd already been in the mouse spots that G2 beat. Shox at this tournament went ham, which was a very promising sign. It was the first time he really had like superstar level performance. But you know what? Kenny S wasn't as strong, and the two somehow didn't come online at the same time, despite the fact Kenny S had been the guy carrying the team firepower-wise at the first 2 lands. So, sadly, at this point in time, you still had never seen the 2 stars, the 2 great French players, Hall of Famers, on the same page, both playing like stars at the same time, and you almost haven't seen it still, which is why you still don't really know what the ceiling for this G2 is, despite the fact people seem to have made their mind up already in many cases. Then we had the VeXii Major London, their 4th event together, where they finished 9th to 11th, so not an appalling result all in all. You look at who they played, they beat Hellraisers on Dust 2. Don't get credit for that for some bizarre reason. Everyone was loving Hellraisers, team that made the playoffs, raving about Issa and Woxic. Somehow, playing them on Dust 2 and beating them didn't get G2 any props, any kind of results, even though everyone acknowledges G2's a team lacking in firepower. So how did they do it? Got to be something to the team, right? Okay, but whatever, best of 1 result. They lost to Complexity on Cash. Now, obviously, Complexity had a very strong run at this tournament. I think largely how whack they looked in the playoffs was playoff nerves. I definitely don't think they're going to be as strong as they showed overall here, but they showed us some potential. Sure, on paper, you should be able to beat Complexity there. It's a pretty nice draw in the second round. They didn't, though. They lost to them, but Complexity beat a number of good teams at this tournament. Then we go to MIBR and Inferno. Okay, you know what? This is a map that you definitely should be able to play. This is a team in MIBR. They have their own problems right now. They can't get the most out of their firepower. They have a lot of issues with coordination. Map pool's pretty solid. Yanko's got them pretty well prepped, but by no means an elite team. Nowhere near S-class team for me. I think this result was a bit underwhelming on a map that G2 likes. Veto actually went quite well for them. Should have been more here. Should have at least been a close game. Should have been a game with some threat. It was fairly easy for MIBR actually. Then we had the appalling game against Cloud9, which was overtime on Inferno. This was basically won by Shoxy. By all rights, Cloud9 probably should have won this game. I think they played pretty well. G2 had the moments where they had nice runs, but the actual fragility of the G2 squad was kind of appalling. So I say Shoxy basically won this game for them. He got their asses out of so many scenarios they shouldn't have been in the first place, and that they misplayed to get into, and then he would win them out of that scenario or pull off some outplay that would get them back into a round. Then they played FaZe Clan. Now on paper, about the hardest opponent you can get at that point in the tournament, round 5 of the Legends stage. They're supposed to beat you in a best of 3. They're one of the top ranked teams in the world. They have some of the best players in the world. They have some of the greatest players to ever play Counter-Strike. Losing to them 0-2, not an absolute disgrace. The way they lost on one of the maps, pretty underwhelming. The Dust 2 game, okay, that was pretty close. That was not a bad game. It wasn't like a good game to watch, but it was a game where they showed some flair, did G2. They were able to play with a much, much better team and hang in there. But you know what? A miss is as good as a mile. Now, not in terms of characterizing a team's performance overall, but a loss is a loss, and it doesn't matter how many good losses you have. They're not wins, and you have to get wins eventually if you want to be a top-level team. Then we have this tournament, the 5th tournament, Esl One New York. Again, 5th to 6th. It's actually been a 5th to 6th placing at 4 tournaments for G2. But again, an 8-team tournament, that ain't a good result. So, on the one hand, they actually this time delivered even more against FaZe Clan. They beat them 2-1. Now, yes, FaZe Clan getting eliminated in last place from the tournament puts a dampener on that result. If FaZe Clan went to the playoffs and performed well, it keeps the stock of that victory high. But you know what? Coming into this tournament, I don't know why everyone now is going to look in hindsight. Most people would have called FaZe to potentially win this tournament, to be in the final of this tournament. We know Astralis, they looked the best against Astralis at the major, the old MMA math. People would say FaZe wins this tournament. So it's all well and good now, retroactively taking credit away from G2. Most crucially, what didn't really deliver in that series was that they won on Inferno and Cash, and these are maps that have been heavily in the wheelhouse of G2. So if they get a team that doesn't let them play one of those maps, how do they win best of 3 series? That's a valid question to ask. So then we go to play against Team Liquid. Now against Team Liquid, they played a close game on Inferno, which was Team Liquid's pick. Okay, we know G2 can play teams close, they can be in games, they can use some of that veteran savvy to potentially grind out some rounds. They've got decent team play at times. You've got to win a map sooner or later, though. You can't take a whole lot of solace in a lot of close one-off maps. And the other map wasn't that close. So this was a legit beating from Team Liquid. Team Liquid was a much, much better squad. Then you go to the decider game, which was against NRG. Okay, Cash was close, but that ain't enough overall again. And you can't play maps like Overpass. there are real reasons as to why it's hard to take too much away. The only thing you can really take away from the NRG series is, you know what, it's a really good series for Shox. He has consistently been good. That's a positive. He's come back from his injury. He seems like he is motivated again. He's developed his style of play. He's found his identity again, which is what he claimed he lost when he was an in-game leader. That's all great. So now let's look at the players in G2 and then consider where this team is at. So let's start. I'm going to go with the players in the order of importance to the team and where I see them in the team. So we're going to start with Kenny S. Now, this has been underwhelming to me because Kenny S was expected to be not just the best player in the team, but a legit superstar player. Like, he was supposed to play at such a high level, like Config did in North last year, like Kenny S did in G2 at times last year, where even if the team isn't top 5 or isn't top 4 or going to win the event, they could play as well as almost any player in the tournament. If Kenny S does that, this is a team that has much better results and is much more dangerous. At the moment, he's one of the better AWPers in the game. And early on in this project of having Smiths in existence back in the team, he was the best player and playing pretty well. But he's been a little bit underwhelming. Now, he's Kenny S, so you have to understand. Underwhelming for him, still pretty good numbers. Still not terrible. The eye test, though, is where I don't think he actually passes. Because he is a good player, but he's not the dominant force he was. He doesn't seem to be as aggressive in rounds as he used to be. Seems to be a lot more further to the back, hesitant, has to be fully set up before he'll go out. He doesn't, to me, as someone who's known Kenny S a long time, I haven't actually spoken about this specifically, but my read is as someone with some inside knowledge, but speculating from outside, is he doesn't look that comfortable in the lineup. He doesn't look like he's confident in his own individual ability level right now. So that, whether or not it's to do with Kenny S and whether that's accurate, that's something people like Existence and Malek, the new coach who just came for this tournament, that's something they need to address, they need to fix, because you've got to have Kenny S at a very high level in this 5-man lineup to have any chance of winning. Because the other part of the equation, obviously, was before you consider them having any success, you're right, you've got to have Kenny S and Shox, both really good, then let's talk about the rest, what the tactics can do, the team play, whether or not the history of some of the players playing together, whether this guy can play a role. You've got to have those two things first, and they haven't gotten those two yet. Now, Shox, like I said before, he's gotten good again, but it only happened after Cologne. So sadly, him and Kenny S, basically Kenny S was up here and started to dive off. And as he dived off, Shox came up and went the other way. And so they still only had one legit star player in most of these games. Shox looks very good now, quite frankly. Looks much improved. Sure, he's not Shox of 2016 or 2014 or 2013 yet. That's correct. That was one of the best players to ever play any version of CS. But he's a pretty good fucking player, especially because he passes the eye test like a motherfucker. Because forget the numbers, which are pretty good, and the stats and the big top fragging games. The eye test of the clutches and the entries that he gets, they are so huge. He is by far the most important player in this team right now. Though I will say, the fact that he's forced to entry as much, first of all, I think degrades his impact to the game because he's such a fabulous clutch player. And secondly, I think is actually a sign of him trying to use his star strength to patch up a weakness of this team, which is at entry. But we'll talk about that in a minute. After Kenny S and Shox, the next clear win condition is Existence, one of the great in-game leaders of all time, including in CSGO. Now, here's the thing. Overall, I can't give Existence a high grade. I would say at the moment, I would give him like a C+. That would be my grade right now. Because on the one hand, CT setups on most maps look pretty good. They seem like they have players in the right positions. They have pretty good teamwork. They have some solid utility usage. That's all looking good. That looks like he's done his job. They even save very well. I actually think for the low firepower they have and the fact that they need people like Kenny S to have an AWP, I think that saving very conservatively as they do right now seems to make a lot of sense. I think they're actually doing it the right way. I think if they force sport more, they would actually get blown out in a lot more of these games and they wouldn't grind their way back in. They need full utility on CT side to run up some of these scores. Utility usage generally looks pretty good. So again, I think they must be doing something in practice. I think that's actually one of the areas that someone like a Smith's working with Existence certainly could help. And the team seems open to the ideas that the leadership is bringing. They seem to have generally a pretty good base level idea for what to do with the body of their map pool. But that map pool isn't big enough. And they don't have a lot of variance they seem to be able to throw in. And crucially, when the firepower really hits its lowest setting, this is a team that then becomes far from dangerous. They lose almost all of their threat, and you've seen some lower level opponents like the Luminosities roll through them at times, quite frankly. So one of the things I've been massively underwhelmed by about this team is that they have way too many results which go like this. Either they grind and they battle and they fight and Shox wins 1vx and Kenny hits crazy shots and they narrowly win a game, or narrowly lose a game, and the other result is just getting blown straight out of the game and not being in the game whatsoever. Like, if you can only grind when you win, that ain't a good sign for a tactical team, and that's a sign that a team has a real lack of firepower, because that's like where North was a few months ago, where they could maybe have a close map and get to 3 maps against an opponent, even the best opponents in the world, but that was by having to grind to do that. Otherwise, they get beaten up and they look shit and everyone would meme on them. Now, the point here is, if you're a really great tactical team and you've got enough players playing the right roles and enough firepower, you grind on the games where it's not going well for you, and that's how you hang in a game, and that's why you like Astralis, and they can't ever get double digits on you, and you always get double digits on that. Like, that's what you do at that point in time. You're supposed to blow the other team out when you have your good game. There aren't any of those for G2, and that's a worrying sign right now, though not necessarily directly indicative of one simple thing to go ahead and predict. T-sides haven't looked as strong as I would have expected with Existence. That's why I have my concerns. I also think you have to look, some of the T-sides that they've really failed to get any significant amount of rounds on or string rounds together, they really look at times like they play hesitant, like they play a little bit shaken. Now, I get that at the Major because Existence has had exactly those problems at Majors in the past in his career. But that should not be a problem for Existence otherwise. You look at the other teams he's played with, even the Kenny S Titan, that itself was a little bit underpowered. In theory, if Shox gets to a good level, it would probably be comparable firepower level to this squad. Even then, they had a pretty solid T-side. They had a very solid map pool. They could grind against a lot of opponents. They didn't tend to get smashed by anyone except the big opponents. So, yeah, that is a bit underwhelming that that's not online yet. You'd think the T-side would be better because actually, in case people aren't aware of this, T-side is where you can get a lot more done with less firepower and less good players. CT side's where you're supposed to have, yes, I know it's about team play and playing off each other, but you need a certain level of raw firepower to be able to hold sites, to be able to hold in man disadvantage scenarios, to be able to stop opponents just rotating off, isolating the weak players and abusing them again and again with fakes and pushes onto those positions. So it's kind of bizarre that at the moment CT side looks stronger for G2, quite frankly. I do think that map pool is one thing that I have a big concern with over Existence here, because first of all, they seem to play entirely to comfort, which suggests, first of all, they don't have a wide enough map pool to punish people, and then they can't punish people because they don't even know they'll win their comfort map yet. Like, you see them picking cash. They haven't won very many cash games. You see them getting Inferno against a lot of teams. Yeah, they've won some pretty epic games, and they've lost a lot of games on it too. Dust 2, okay, they can play against a number of teams. They've got a chance to. Are they one of the best teams in the world at it for how many hours they've put in, how much they've emphasized it in their map pool as a pick, and a map that they're not going to ban? See, this is kind of a bit underwhelming, right? This is a team that really doesn't seem like they themselves believe they're better than their record says they are thus far. Finally, individually, Existence has been somewhat poor. Now, again, he hasn't played at the top tier for a long time. He is primarily the in-game leader. You can live with Existence being a low-fragging in-game leader if he's getting his job done on the T side, if they have a strong map pool and his stars are where they need to be. Because without his stars, the project concept doesn't work. Now, the last two players are obviously Body and Smiths. Now, Body, I have to say, first of all, I don't have massive criticisms. He's still a very young player. He's a player who's been moved around roles in his career. Where is the fragging, though? Like, all the people who were raving last year, oh, Body, what a great player. You know, if he didn't have all these top French players around him, he'd be a much better fragging player. Nothing to suggest as much in his career. In the first year of his career, also not playing the best roles. He had some solid fragging. People didn't know him. Second year of his career, playing with arguably a better team. He looked much worse. He was just a player filling in the numbers. He wasn't an outright liability always, but his fragging level wasn't very good. And therefore, when the whole teams fell off, he was one of the players who noticeably wasn't doing much. In this team, I've been really underwhelmed by his fragging. I don't really know that he fits the role he's in. I'm not quite sure why he's here, except to get that major spot. Well, the major's gone now, and actually you've already got the 3 players to be in the next major, so it's not necessarily a demand to have Body. For me, I've made the joke on By the Numbers, he kind of lives up to his name. He's just a body, he just fills a seat. Does he have great experience? No, not really. Does he have great fragging? At the moment, not really. Does he fit his role amazingly? If so, where are the numbers? Doesn't have all the experience of playing with these players, especially. People say he's a soldier, he does his job, okay, that's a positive. But if I have to consider removing someone, he has to be someone I think about. And then finally, the player I had the least expectations for, individually this is, and yes, that's obviously going to be Smiths. Now, I will say, he started out looking much better than you'd expect, but overall, okay, his fragging's a bit underwhelming, especially because he doesn't play super safe. He doesn't play just for the team. Sometimes he'll try and take certain aggressive duels that I don't know how he thinks he's going to win. So I think he is a little bit of a liability. In terms of numbers, he's definitely a liability. His fragging is very underwhelming, at times to the extent that he can be a direct anchor to the team. And I think that's why some of those epic close games that they lose, you go look how many kills Smith's Existence combined get, it just won't cut the mustard. Like, you need Kenny S and Shocks to be like electronic and simple right now to even that balance out. I also think, unfortunately, Smiths does still make some panic plays. I see him in some tough situations where he'll make the odd boneheaded play, which again, I expect this guy to be an intelligent player, to play around his team, to play off communication, and he will make those plays that will actually open a round up for the opponent, and that's kind of criminal, I think, overall. So let's look at them as a team now and stylistically. Okay, first of all, the most immediate, obvious thing I think this team needs is a higher quality entry presence. I don't know whether that's this team and you enable Kenny S to be more aggressive and take early picks, in which case him and Shocks can get it done. I don't know if that means replacing one of Smith's and Body and getting a strong, raw aimer entry player. That could be many players in the French scene. But entry play is what I feel like they need on that T side to give them a strong T side, and then that alone will already put them in contention to start winning more of these series, to get more playoff appearances. That's a little tweak that would really do a lot for this team. Now, it's not an excuse entirely for the T side. Like I said, it's not just a bit on raw individual play. But I think the defaults will run a lot better, because you're seeing once they run out of that and they don't realize they don't work, the variation isn't there at the moment. CT setups, they've offset some of that so far. But again, get another stronger player on CT side. I think you emphasize your strength in that point in time. Now, the map pool currently is not strong enough. They can play Inferno. Okay, cool. Yeah, a lot of people like to play Inferno. It's not godlike enough, though. They get some solid upsets on it, but they play a lot of close games on it, and they can also be blown out on it. So, is it really that strong a map for them? They get to play it a lot, but that's mainly because most other people have it in the middle of their map pool. Then you go to Dust 2. They've clearly put in a lot of time on Dust 2. Their utility usage suggests they might actually think it's their favourite map or one of their best maps, but they aren't a guaranteed win on this map against most teams. In fact, there's even top-level teams that themselves haven't necessarily figured out Dust 2, like FaZe Clan, who can beat them on it. So, not really that impressive when you consider this is a top 2 map for them. Now, they've picked Cash quite a lot, because so many other teams don't play it, and yet it's often available because a lot of teams ban maps like Nuke and Overpass. They have not proven their worth there for me. Like, they have a basis on that map, but the CT sides look a little bit dodgy. The T sides can run completely out of steam. It is an individually skill-based map, and they don't always bring the firepower to actually be able to emphasize any of their strengths on the map and get a win. Then you look beyond that. Okay, they seem to be able to play Nuke, but it's not a map they're heavily emphasizing. Beyond that, there's not much else. Overpass, where is that? Okay, nowhere, right? Mirage, they can play it if forced to, but they still lose, so it's a successful punish to pick against them. Train, I mean, they ban it. I feel like maybe it's a map they should try, but then again, you're going to have very good setups on that map. It's not a map historically they've necessarily liked that much. I know actually in the last G2 lineup that had Existence in it, that was one of their strongest maps at the end there. You've got to have some of these maps. You can't just have 4 maps and even then not be world beaters on them. No wonder you're not winning big series. Now, the results, I have to say, are much tougher to gauge than people make out. A lot of people are like, right, this project's failed, reset the whole thing. In fact, most of them just kick them all except Shocks and Kenny S, or except Shocks, or whoever it is, you know, bring in MBK and RPK. No, it's not that simple, because let's look at the results they've had. When you consider they're a team that don't make the playoffs, they have had some individual results that are very strong for a team in that contextual position. But overall, look at the placings. Yes, the placings are very underwhelming. That is a very legit criticism. Making the playoffs once, never finishing top 4 at a single event. Those are very legitimate criticisms to say this team hasn't lived up to what the project should be able to accomplish. But now you look at individual results, and there's a lot of promise there. They beat Na'Vi in a best of 1. Na'Vi has some of the best players in the world. They beat Mouse Sports in a best of 3. Again, not many teams are doing that in a best of 3. And Mouse Sports is a team also with a lot of talent. They beat FaZe Clan in a best of 3. How many top teams have beaten FaZe Clan in best of 3s online? It ain't really happening, homie. Go look. They took Astralis to overtime on Dust 2. The best team in the world on a map that they've also been very good utility-wise. Only been upset once on that map themselves, and that was after the fact. They were super strong against FaZe on Dust 2, even though they lost. FaZe has some of the best individual players in the world. So if your bombs individually, which G2 sometimes look like, and people think Existence is a bad in-game leader, and that they don't know what they do in the current meta, how are they getting these results? It doesn't make sense. You don't just get loads of upsets and really great one-off performances or one-off best of threes unless there's something to the core of the team. An accident or fluke can happen once or twice. It doesn't happen this many times, though. If you thought this was going to be a French super team, then yes, you're absolutely right. You should be very critical. This project has failed in that regard at this point in time. Hasn't even come close. But as a project, I think there's something here. I mean, I didn't think it was going to become the best team in the world or win all the teams, or that this was the French super team. I think it has the makings of the French super team. The French super team to me is Kenny S and Shocks playing together. That's condition one. No matter whether we agree on the in-game leader, the other players, you have to have those two, and at a high level, you start there, because that's potentially the best team of all time, with those two in top form. Then I would add in Existence. I would say, look at the scene, who's available. This is someone with a strong tactical background. Yes, we're going to have to get over the issue of choking at majors. Yes, we're going to have to be able to sort out some of the politics of the other players, but these three are a solid base to make a team around. Now, with the others, Smiths and Body, yes, we can definitely get into that discussion, and some of that clearly is down to politics, right? But a lot of why I think people are going so hard against G2, it's either a mixture of trying to prove me wrong because they know I like Existence and like to watch this team generally play. I have to say I didn't enjoy watching this particular lineup play, but the past lineups, Titan, Very Games, etc. This is how you know people are mad haters on Existence. So consider this for a second. Contrast G2's results and G2's number of big best-of-3 series wins and big individual map wins over elite-level teams. Top 10 ranked, top 5 ranked, best team in the world. Consider the contrast between placings and results and then poor performances between Big and God B and Existence and G2. It ain't as bad when you go look at the actual placings and then the individual game results. It really is not as bad. In fact, G2, like I said, with all those wins, they've got a very comparable record in terms of high moments. People don't bang on Big that way because they don't expect the same things from Big. They're fine with knowing that Next will probably choke, that Smoothie's an up-and-coming player, Tizian's a nobody. They understand this is a team with low firepower, trying to make it work. When they work, everyone praises Big, praises Gobby. When it doesn't work, they go, oh, well, could we get better players in this team? Should we give them some more time? Big's had a whole fucking bunch of tournaments themselves, mate. Where were they at the major? What were they doing? Yeah, they made it one round further than G2. And what did they do there? Get their heads fucking banged off on maps that they were picking as punish maps against the opponent and have basically no chance against Na'Vi. We just saw G2 beat FaZe in a best-of-3 on LAN. Okay, why do people not give similar critique or praise as they do to one or the other? You've got to keep consistent. Then you look at Fallen and MIBR. My God, has a team made less top fours with this level of talent ever in history? It's outrageous what a bad job Fallen's done. Looking at the pure ratings and placings of this squad, if he's the in-game leader, you should be calling him out as one of the worst in-game leaders in all of World Counter-Strike. I don't see almost anyone doing that. People are just happy to let this dude chill. It's been ages since we've seen anything from him. Finally, I'll give you the one last example that for me is the smoking gun that people just hate Existence and can't admit it. If you hate him, you know what? Make a comment. I hate him. I think he's rubbish. I think Thorin's an idiot. There you go. That's a legit comment. Now, it's not necessarily an opinion I'd agree with, but just an opinion. Just lying and making up the past and acting like, oh, this one thing here I consider by these criteria. What about the other thing? I ignore that criteria there. Here we go. Chris J and Mouse Sports. You all loved Chris J when Mouse Sports was top 4 all the time. Once they had stick coordinate, they were still managing to beat top teams, go to 3 maps against top teams, even win international titles. Everyone loved Chris J, right? Where's the criticism of Chris J for this Mouse Sports lineup? He's got even more talent. He's got snacks now. He's not doing shit at majors, 0-3. By the way, G2 did much better than that. He's barely ever doing anything at tournaments. He's never making top 4. Did it once at E-League. Everyone's just cool with that, are they? Way more talent. Way more proven talent right now. Players that are top players right now, including Sonny. Established map pool, many months together, tons of events. Everyone's just cool. No one's hating on Chris J. You know why? Because they don't just put all the blame on him. They don't say everything wrong with the teams to do with him. That's what they do with Existence. So moving forwards, I don't think that this push to reset the whole team or to kick out Existence to Smiths and whatever and make like a new super team is really the approach to take here. I definitely, by the way, don't get the argument that like that fork in history where they could have stuck with MBK's lineup or Mixwell or this one. Like, oh, what if they'd have stuck with it? That lineup was fucking garbage. That NBK lineup was worse results-wise, both in terms of placings and individual games, had way less high points, had no redeeming factors, didn't have a plan going forwards. It already capped out and wasn't going anywhere, and NBK had not proven himself as an in-game leader. There are a lot of markers and a lot of signposts to suggest that something could be done with this G2 lineup. Likewise, scrim hype around this second French team that's going to be so sick and represent Vitality. They haven't done anything yet. That's well and good, and I hope they turn out to be amazing, have a fantastic, different style, and be the envious of this era. Great, I'd love all that. They've yet to do anything. So saying that this team that you're seeing in tournaments have good results, but then ultimately not get the placing they need, should be replaced by players who are winning scrims and against who, based on Twitter hype. I don't get this at all. I mean, that's some of the wackest analysis I've ever heard from people in the scene. Some of these people are insiders who are saying this shit. Now let's look at the politics, because as ever, the French scene is dominated by politics. The issue here is, can we get other players? And I'd agree, I'd like some of those other players. Some of those players you can't get because personality-wise, history-wise, for whatever reason, they won't play with these players. Then there's the issue of the players you have got. Smiths, Body. Now, I understand you needed Body for the Major before. Fair enough. That is no longer the case. He should now be someone you can consider replacing. I would obviously replace Smiths, but I understand that if he really has to be there for Shocks to feel motivated into the game, into the project and fully committed, then it has to be Body out of the two, doesn't it? Because the rest of them logically have their position, their role, their job to play. And if Smiths cannot go, then it must be Body. And quite frankly, Body hasn't been playing well enough that no matter how much you want to hate on Smiths, I think it justifies him having to stay over Smiths. If anything, you add the Shocks aspect and you can make a compelling case that maybe Body shouldn't be on this team anyway. I don't know. I don't feel like he's doing a whole lot. So here's the issue. Personally, I would keep this core. So at a minimum, I would obviously just keep Kenny S. Shock's existence. And if it's up to me, yeah, I would go and I'd get NBK and Apex, whatever, and I'd try the super team like that. That would be my choice if I did. That would have been my choice from day one. But it isn't my choice. I'm not the one pragmatically making this lineup, am I? Now, I would say this. You probably want to keep the core and kick either Smiths or Body. So since we know Smiths isn't going, it's going to be Body, right? So you keep those four players. That alone, I think, could be a solid top 10 team. I think it has the basis to be a good squad. And if Kenny S and Shocks get good enough, potentially be a top 5 team. Because here's the thing. We know Shocks can improve. He's already done it event to event to event. His level's already pretty good now. He just needs someone to help him. Kenny S can and needs to improve. And why I say that is, Kenny S has been one of the most resilient players over the half a decade that CSGO's been out at consistently, first of all, being at very minimum a good player and getting back to the top again and again and either becoming the best or contending for best AWPer in the world. I think it can happen. I don't see any reason it can't. Almost all the downtime in the past in his career in terms of level was to do with motivation or problems in the team. That's why I'm concerned he's uncomfortable for some reason in the setup they have. Maybe not the players in the team, but just maybe the way they're trying to utilize him on feeling like he's lacking strength from teammates and so doesn't want to put himself in bad situation to get killed super early. That's a mentality that can develop in star players. But that's got to be fixed. But it could be. Shocks and Kenny S are players. It's actually reasonable to expect them to get to an elite level again. It's not reasonable to expect Snacks and Get Right to be an elite level consistently again. They have consistently shown they're not going to do that and won't be returning to the top again. Now, beyond that, existence is fine. Sure, he needs to improve his T-sides if he wants to remain as his star in-game leader, but individually, it's not the end of the world to have him low fragging. We've got Godby out there. We've got MSL out there. We've got obviously Zeus would be a fucking amazing example. We've got Carrigan. We've got plenty of players that don't frag heavily as in-game leaders, and yet their teams win tournaments of some of the best in the entire world. Smiths and Body are my clear issues. Arguably, both of them are. If I could, as I said, I'd remove both. But okay, if we have to keep one, I would say this. When it comes to the politics, the one thing I wish we could do in the French scene is what happened with Na'Vi. Because I always tell this story because people miss it. They think it's just a cool piece of trivia. The most important detail about how Ukraine went from being like, we might have one team that could border on the top 10 in the world and the odd fluke result, to we now, the very next year, have the best team in the world, who then contends for best team of all time and wins 4 CS 1.6 majors in a row, is all because of this one detail, which is that when Arbalest, this multi-millionaire rich oil magnate, came to Starix, veteran player in the Ukrainian scene, and asked him to make the team that became Na'vi. He gave him the mandate. You are to pick players who would make the most sense playing together and be the best team, ignoring personal petty differences and politics. You do not include who's played with who likes who doesn't want to play with someone. You get the team together and you say, we're professionals, we have a salary, we practice this way, and this is the best team, because crucially, Arbalest wanted it to represent Ukraine as best as possible. And guess what? It went on to be one of the very best teams to ever play any version of Counter-Strike. I might make the case the best 1.6 team of all time. It's a legitimate case you can make. If they did that in the French scene right now, you would have a top 5 team in the world. You would have a team that could win majors. You would have a team that could go for the absolute limits of what is possible because of the talent the French scene has, because they have every role in the French scene, because they have fabulous experience both in CSGO, at the top level of CSGO, and in 1.6, and in CS Source. This is a scene that should be thriving. And G2 is a squad which has the framework, but has some clear sort of roadblocks stopping them going on past where they need to go. So contrast this team now and what it would be with a Kenny S and Shockstein are both top players. Do you know who Na'Vi is? Na'Vi is a team that has 2 superstar players that are so good, it means the others can be underwhelming. They can have 2 players who are bombs. They can have Zeus and Edward shit up a game with very low fragging, terrible numbers, and they can be any team. They can be the top team in the world. Well, not number 1, obviously, but number 2. They can win tournaments. They can make it top 4 every single tournament except this one. They can be a phenomenal team. They can have an amazing map pool. They can play against any team. They're always in a match. They don't have a whole bunch of fraggers. People overrate the fuck out of Flamey in that lineup. But he's definitely doing a lot more than his corresponding part body is in G2, isn't he? So they have the solid third player in Flamey. That's the key part. They don't have that in G2. They don't have an RPK, a Scream, Kiyashima, MBK, whoever might play that role. Then they have the liabilities just like Na'Vi does in Zeus and Edward. I think they're pretty comparable to Existence and Smiths. Obviously, you have to give Existence the downgrade in as much as Zeus has been a leader the whole time. He's never had the off time. He's stayed at a high level. He's got his style defined. Existence doesn't necessarily look like, with his hesitancy on the T side, like he's fully embracing his style or is confident in his style. That's a knock against him. But the point is, these teams can work. This notion that every player has to be a good fragger, it's never been reality. It's only said by people who aren't looking at the facts, and they never present examples to show why this is. So liabilities don't kill a team outright. That's a very, very misleading thing. Now, I have a different concept that I'm going to come up with soon, a new series where basically I break down rosters, who you could change, how you could change them. So we'll save more of an overhaul of G2 for that. But that's where G2's at 5 tournaments in. Still some promising signs. Couple of players either have to improve or we have to have a player move. Like I said, I thought even when they made this line, it's one player change from being a team that now has a reasonable balance, has the right mix of firepower, and can be legitimately dangerous in the current global climate.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.